I have been asked more than once how I knew. The answer is embarrassing, and I have made my peace with that. I knew because 12 apex predators told me. I knew because they stepped back from a man I had spent 2 years treating like furniture, and the furniture did not move, and the furniture did not flinch, and the furniture looked at them with the same level unhurried gaze it turned on everything, on council proceedings, on border disputes, on me when I was angry and wrong. And the 12 of them understood something I had refused to understand, and I stood in the Varath reception hall and felt my pride fold flat like a struck sail. That was 43 days ago. I am still working out how to carry it. My name is Sorvin Irathon. I am 3rd-tier wing commander of the Velkarath Frontier Circuit, holding rank Pretha, which in your compact standard means something between a decorated war captain and a provisional noble. I earned the rank at 31, which is early for Velkarath in any tier, and I kept it through 3 posting cycles by doing the work well and understanding that doing the work well is its own argument. I have held territory at 5 separate frontier outposts. I have filed 31 successful engagement reports and 2 formal bereavement citations for personnel lost under my command, both of which I consider the more important documents. I say all of this not to impress you, but to explain the shape of my arrogance. I had built it carefully, over years, out of real things, and it fit me so well by the time Davin Thresh came into my life that I did not know I was wearing it. The treaty compact that joined us was a frontier renegotiation instrument. I'm not embarrassed to say that. Velkarath border doctrine required a bonding declaration to solidify the human sector corridor agreement, and I was the ranking officer at the relevant tier. Davin Thresh was a retired human frontier patrol commander, 12 years senior to my own frontier service, whose particular assignment history overlapped the corridor in question at 11 distinct points. The compact liaison called him the best available option for the declaration. She had phrased it carefully. I remembered later, not the closest match or the most convenient option, but the best available, which implies a ranking, and a ranking implies she had compared. I did not ask her to elaborate. I had a posting to run. He arrived at my station carrying 2 duffel bags and a compact registry document folder. He was taller than I had expected, broad through the shoulders in the way of someone who has moved heavy things in low-gravity environments, with a jaw that carried a scar from something I never asked about and gray beginning at his temples and a look in his eyes that I had no category for at the time and that I would spend 2 years misfilling. He shook my hand. He said, "Commander Irathon, I understand the arrangement. I'll try not to be in the way." I told myself that was modest and appropriate. I did not ask what in the way meant to him, or what he had arranged to be not in the way of before. I showed him his quarters. I went back to my work. The court, what served as a court at a frontier station of my rank, which is to say, my 2 senior officers, Preeth Elevar San and Preeth Yeneth Corvish, 3 junior liaisons, and a civilian attaché named Ren Vashori who handled my correspondence, took note of Davin Thresh within his first 48 hours and reached a consensus that required no formal meeting. The consensus was that he was harmless. He was, they agreed, decorative in the sense that treaty obligations can be decorative, present, technically necessary, conferring a certain legitimacy on proceedings, contributing nothing of tactical significance. Elevar called him soft. She said it the way people say things they believe are obvious, with the particular confidence of someone who reads a surface and does not look for what is underneath. Yeneth called him quiet, which Yeneth meant as a compliment and which landed as something else, because quiet at a frontier posting can mean too many different things, and Yeneth was applying the simplest of them. Ren Vashari, who was more careful than either of them, and whom I should have listened to more closely, said only that the human had read every frontier patrol log filed from the corridor sector in the last 18 years, which was a very specific thing to do in your first 2 days at a new posting, and that she found it notable. I heard all of this. I filed none of it correctly. For 2 years, Davin Thresh was present at every function, introduced last or not at all. He sat to my left at formal dinners and said almost nothing and ate everything placed before him with the particular systematic attention of someone who understood that meals at frontier postings were not guaranteed. He read. He read constantly, not display reading, not reading to be seen reading, but the kind of reading that happened in corners of rooms while everyone else was doing something else, documents stacked in a careful order beside him, a stylus moving occasionally across a margin annotation. When I asked him once early on what he was reading, he said, "Patrol variance records for the Veth'naar corridor. Nothing urgent." I said, "There is nothing in the Veth'naar corridor," and he looked at me with those steady gray eyes and said, "That's what the variance records say," and went back to reading. I thought he was eccentric. I thought he was filling his time. The court's understanding of him calcified in the first season and did not thaw in the second. Elevar called him your attendant in briefings when she meant your compact partner, and I noticed this and said nothing, and each time I said nothing, I was making a small choice that accumulated. Yeneth once asked, in front of a visiting logistics officer from the Veth'naar Sector Boundary Authority, whether I found it inconvenient to travel with a civilian. I said something noncommittal and moved on, and I watched Davin hear it from across the room. He was at the document station, working through manifest records as he usually was, and I watched him not react. Not the careful non-reaction of someone suppressing a response. The genuine non-reaction of someone who has heard a version of this many times and has decided on each occasion that it is not worth the cost of correcting. I told myself his lack of reaction was the equanimity of a man at peace with his role. I did not ask myself whether it might be something more considered than that, something more expensive. He fixed things. I noticed this eventually. Not in any declared or official capacity. He was listed in the station manifest as compact liaison, non-operational. But there was a water reclamation fault in the East Wing that 3 different engineers had looked at and filed inconclusive reports on across 4 months. And one morning I walked past the maintenance corridor and found Davin Thresh flat on his back inside the access panel with a calibration tool. And by the afternoon the fault was resolved. When I asked him how he had found it, he said, "The variance in the morning pressure readings. It follows a 12-day cycle, which means it's a seal expansion issue, not a filter issue. The filter is where everyone was looking." I said, "How did you know to look at the pressure readings?" He said, "I read the maintenance logs," which was not an answer to the question I had actually asked, and which I let stand because I was already mentally elsewhere and because the fault was fixed. There was a dispute between 2 of my junior liaisons over corridor filing protocol that had produced 11 formal grievance documents and was threatening to collapse our entire administrative process for the quarter. It had been running for 6 weeks when Davin sat down with both of them separately, in sessions of roughly half an hour each, in the small conference room adjacent to the document station. I was not present for either session, and I did not ask what he said. The grievances were withdrawn by the following day, and the 2 liaisons were, if not warm, at least operational, and the filing process resumed. I thanked Davin. He said, the dispute was about something else. The filing protocol was just where it was living. I said, "What was it about?" He said, "Which one of them mattered enough to be heard?" I went back to my work. There was a supply manifest error that had caused 3 consecutive delivery shortfalls in our medical inventory. Davin found it in 12 minutes when Ren Vashori asked him to look. A single transposed digit in a routing code that had been propagating through the system for 4 months, and that 2 separate logistics reviews had not caught. He found it because, he said, he had been cross-referencing our delivery history against the corridor transit logs and noticed the shortfalls followed a pattern consistent with a routing code error rather than a supply chain failure. And once you know what kind of problem you are looking for, the problem is in the first place you look. Ren Vashori thanked him specifically. I noted it in the incident record. I did not reevaluate what it implied about the man who had done it. I noticed. I did not reevaluate. I told myself these were small things, which they were, individually. I did not consider what they added up to, which is the error that the *Orvsil* protocol exists to address. 43 days ago, the Veth'naar reception. The occasion was a frontier renegotiation summit, the third in a cycle that had been running for 6 years. My posting at Veth'naar had been chosen as the venue because of the corridor's strategic positioning, and because I held the relevant compact authority, and because the compact liaison believed that a visible display of Vel'Karath frontier capability would encourage productive terms from the attending delegations. There were 11 delegations coming. 10 of them were species we had compact relationships with, ranging from warm to transactional. The 11th was the Veth'naar. I should explain the Veth'naar, because if you have not met them, the word means nothing, and if you have met them, you understand why I felt the temperature in the planning room drop every time their delegation was mentioned. The Veth'naar are a scouting caste, which is an inadequate description in the same way that calling a geological fault a crack in the ground is inadequate. They are the forward assessment arm of something much larger that has never needed to negotiate anything because it has simply moved through what it wanted, and what remained afterward was what it had permitted to remain. They are not aggressive in the way that aggression requires provocation. They are thorough. When a Veth'naar scouting party assesses a sector, the sector has been assessed, and the parties with interests in that sector will know it by the pattern of what the scouting party chose to acknowledge and what it chose to walk through. They came to the Veth'naar summit not because they were interested in compact terms, but because they were interested in assessment. They were there to look at what we presented and determine what we were. 12 of them, a scouting party, which is the Veth'naar designation for a working number. Their senior delegate was called, in compact standard transliteration, something that resolved to the one who arrives first, which is both a title and a statement about what that means for everything that comes after. I had spent 3 weeks in pre-summit preparations, running through every scenario my senior officers could model. Every scenario ended with some version of the same outcome. The Veth'naar would look at what we presented, and they would decide whether we were worth the trouble of a compact instrument or whether we were something else. Something else was not a phrase anyone was willing to finish, and I did not push them to finish it, because I had read enough Veth'naar border history to understand the finishing was not a useful exercise. The useful exercise was presenting something they would assess as a corridor worth acknowledging. I ran my honor guard through 4 rehearsals. I reviewed the formal greeting protocols in 3 separate documentation sets and found 3 minor contradictions, which I resolved by going back to the oldest source on the reasoning that the Veth'naar would not have adapted to recent compact revisions and would be orienting to older forms. I reviewed the summit hall layout 4 times. I briefed Elivar and Yeneth until they could run the secondary positions without prompting. I asked Ren Vashori to review the summit agenda for any procedural gaps, and she did and found 2 and closed them. I told Davin the night before that he should stay close to me during the reception. Not for any tactical reason. I did not think of him in tactical terms, but because the compact registry authority was technically held jointly, and there were procedural moments during the summit where his countersignature would be required. He said, "Understood," and then asked if I had eaten, and when I said I hadn't, he brought me a plate from the station kitchen and sat across from me while I ate, and the stack of annotated Veth'naar corridor variants records he had printed and put beside my chair some days earlier, which I had moved twice without opening, was sitting in the corner of the room, and he did not mention it, and I did not open it. At the end of the meal he said, "The 3 anomalous departure patterns in the eastern subcorridor, did the variance notes I flagged in the summary cover them adequately?" I said I had not read the summary. He said, I sent it in the second month. I said, I marked it red. There was a pause. He said, all right. The short version. The Veth'naar have made 3 survey passes through the eastern subcorridor in the last 14 months that deviate from their standard assessment pattern. The deviation is consistent with reassessment behavior. When they've already logged something and they come back differently than when they're logging for the first time. The eastern subcorridor has been reassessed. I don't know what that means for tomorrow, but I think it's worth knowing. I said, what would it mean if they were reassessing? He said, it would mean they found something worth the second look. I went to bed and did not sleep well. I lay in the dark and thought about the eastern subcorridor, and about the variance summary I had marked read, and about the look in his eyes when I told him I had marked it read, which was not disappointment exactly, or not only disappointment. It was the look of someone who has been answering a question no one has asked yet, and who has understood for some time that the question will eventually arrive, and who is simply waiting. The reception began at the 3rd hour. My honor guard, 6 Vel'Karath in formal frontier armor, opaline black with copper inlay, the compact sigil on the left pauldron, formed behind me at the entrance to the Varathsen Hall. Davin was to my left, slightly behind, carrying the compact registry folder in his left hand and nothing else. He wore his frontier patrol dress uniform, human standard, matte dark, no insignia beyond his service identification, and he looked exactly like what I had told myself he was. Present, technically necessary, contributing nothing of tactical significance. The hall itself was a statement of Vel'Karath capability, which had been the point. High ceilings worked in the banded stone of the station's original construction, the compact sigil in copper relief above the main entrance, the formal banners of the frontier circuit hanging from the upper rail, with the kind of precise equidistance that takes longer to achieve than it appears to. The light was good, not too ceremonial, not too harsh, daylight through the upper clerestory panels mixed with the warm amber of the station's secondary lighting, and the combined effect read as functional authority, which was what I had wanted. I had reviewed the light levels twice. I had reviewed them twice. The first 10 delegations arrived in sequence and were received. I performed the correct greetings. Elevar stood to my right and managed the formal introductions with the fluency of someone who had done this many times and knew how to make the routine look deliberate. Yeneth held the secondary cordon with the squared-up posture of frontier armor worn correctly, which is a specific kind of communication about who is wearing it. Ren Vashori tracked every detail in the peripheral log and murmured corrections to me when I needed them. A species-specific greeting variant I had momentarily reversed. A delegation head's title suffix I had shortened incorrectly. The hall filled with the particular dense warmth of 11 frontier species in dress attire, and the proceedings had the slightly unreal quality that high-stakes formal events always have, where everyone is being very careful, and the care itself creates a kind of pressure, and you stay in the surface of your training and let the training carry you. The Veth'naar arrived at the 43rd minute. They came through the eastern entrance rather than the main hall entrance, which was technically within protocol but was also a signal. The eastern entrance opened directly onto the landing field, and what it said was, "We came through our side, not yours." I had briefed for this possibility. I had told myself I was ready for it. I discovered in the moment that briefing for a possibility and standing in the moment of the possibility are not the same thing. 12 of them, in person, and I had not been in the same room as Veth'naar before, only reviewed documentation and second-hand accounts. They were larger than I had modeled, not larger in a simple height sense, larger in the way a gravitational body is larger than its visual diameter. You feel them before your senses fully account for them. The room understood they had entered before the room saw them enter. Conversations paused. The 10 other delegations in the hall, which had collectively managed wars, famines, plague events, and border collapses without breaking diplomatic protocol, went very still in the particular way that living things go still when something in the environment changes that they have not yet categorized. The senior delegate, the one who arrives first, moved down the greeting line. The greetings at Veth'naar were structured. Each delegation head would move from the entrance to the compact authority station, where I stood, passing the assembled guests. The guests would offer the species-appropriate acknowledgement. The delegate would receive and respond and continue. It was designed to be orderly and to be seen, and it had been orderly for 10 delegations, and it continued to be orderly as the senior Veth'naar moved with the contained directional efficiency of something that does not waste movement, and the other delegations gave ground as it passed, not rudely, not obviously, just slightly, the way everything in a room adjusts to the presence of something denser than the room expected. My honor guard held their formal posture. I held mine. The senior Veth'naar reached the compact authority station. I offered the formal Vel'Karath greeting, both hands visible, crest settled. I had practiced this until the muscle memory was solid, and the muscle memory held. The senior delegate looked at me. Then, without moving its gaze from where I was standing, it recalibrated its attention to my left. I thought it was looking at Elivar. Elivar was not to my left. The senior Veth'naar was looking at Davin Thresh. Davin was holding the compact registry folder in his left hand, at ease, looking at the senior delegate with the same expression he turned on everything, level, unhurried, patient, and he did not step back, and he did not shift his weight, and his hands did not tighten on the folder, and he did not look at me for guidance or reassurance or instruction. He looked like a man who has been somewhere very specific before and has recognized the terrain. The senior Veth'naar looked at him for 4 seconds. I counted because I needed something to do with the part of my mind that was not performing the greeting. Then it stepped back. Not backward in the direction it had come from. Laterally, half a step to the left, which repositioned it so that Davin was no longer in its direct forward path. It was a small movement. It was the kind of movement you make around an obstacle, not around a person, around something in the geography that has been noted and is being respected. Behind the senior delegate, the 11 others adjusted, not dramatically, not as a formation executing a command. Just the way 11 beings adjust when the thing in front of them has moved, and the reason for the movement is understood without being stated, because that kind of understanding moves through a group like a current, not like an announcement. I did not understand it. I was standing close enough to see every detail of the senior Veth'naar's face, and I do not have adequate vocabulary in compact standard for what I saw there, not fear, not deference, not the political recognition of rank, something more fundamental. The look that living things give to other living things when the older part of their cognition, the part that does not run through language or status calculation or diplomatic protocol, has identified something and is communicating that identification without ceremony. A reed, a genuine one, landed in the body before it reached thought. The senior Veth'naar completed the formal greeting to me, appropriate phrases, correct cadence, no deviation from protocol, and moved on. The 11 others followed. The reception continued. I stood at the compact authority station for the next 20 minutes performing my function, and the entire time I was performing my function I was aware of Davin Thresh to my left, holding the registry folder, watching the room with the same unhurried attention he brought to everything. I was aware of him in a way I had not been aware of him in 2 years, which is to say, I was finally looking. And what I saw over the following 3 hours was the Veth'naar delegation orienting itself around Davin Thresh the way a current orients around a submerged rock, always aware, always giving a specific measure of ground, never explaining why. They did not approach him. They did not acknowledge him by gesture or word or any visible signal. There was no moment of dramatic confrontation, no incident, no exchange I could have pointed to and described to Elivar afterward. It was subtler than that and more complete, and the subtlety was itself the thing, because the Veth'naar do not work in drama. They work in geography. They move through the landscape they have assessed, and they give deliberate ground to the features of that landscape that they have classified as features. And the classification is quiet and absolute, and requires no announcement. The senior delegate, moving through the hall on the business of the summit, twice adjusted its path to maintain a certain distance from where Davin was standing. The first adjustment happened in the 48th minute, when the senior delegate crossed toward the eastern refreshment alcove, and Davin, entirely unaware of being tracked, moved from the registry station toward Ren Vashori's position to hand her a document. They came within 15 meters of a direct intersection, and the senior delegate's path curved, not dramatically, not so any other observer would register it as a curve, just shifted by the specific margin that put Davin out of the forward line. The adjustment was not the adjustment of someone avoiding a hazard. It was the adjustment of someone maintaining a considered interval around something they have assessed and classified and do not intend to test. The distinction is legible if you know what you are looking at. I was beginning to know. The second adjustment came in the second hour, when the senior delegate was engaged in extended discussion with the Vel'Karath secondary trade liaison, a conversation that required proximity to the documentation display along the hall's eastern wall. Davin crossed behind them, heading for the water station. The senior delegate, mid-sentence, angled its stance by perhaps 15 degrees, reorienting so that Davin was not in its blind space. It did not pause. It did not interrupt the conversation. It simply adjusted, the way everything in a room adjusts to the presence of something denser than expected, and the adjustment was so natural that the trade liaison did not notice it at all. The other 11 did the same, each in their own way. One of them, moving through the left flank of the room toward the refreshment station, altered course when Davin crossed to speak to Ren Vashori, and the alteration was so smooth and so calibrated that anyone not watching closely would have missed it. I was watching closely. I saw it. I saw it again when Davin moved back to the registry station to check something in his documentation, and the nearest Veth'naar, which had been in a position that would have put it in his path, was not in that position anymore without appearing to have moved. I watched this happen across 3 hours of summit activity, and I thought of the corridor variance records I had moved twice without opening, and I thought of the eastern sub-corridor reassessments he had described, and I thought of the word reassessment, and what he had said reassessment behavior meant. When they've already logged something and they come back differently. What struck me most in the third hour was that Davin himself gave no indication he noticed any of it. He moved through the hall the way he moved through everything, with the particular unhurried attention of someone who is doing several things at once without any of them being performed. He checked documentation. He exchanged a few words with one of the visiting logistics delegates. I watched that conversation and saw the delegate relax in a way that delegates at high-stakes summits generally do not relax, which is something I would think about later. He brought Ren Vashori a cup of the station tea, because she had been on her feet since the second hour, and he knew she didn't always remember to eat or drink when the log was running. He did all of this without drama, and without any apparent awareness that 12 apex predators were rearranging themselves around him, the way the tide rearranges itself around a promontory. I watched him not notice, and I thought, either he genuinely doesn't know what he is to them, or he knows and he has been it for so long that the knowing has become ordinary, the way any true thing becomes ordinary when you have lived with it for years and the world hasn't confirmed it yet. Both possibilities were humbling to sit with. The third possibility that he knew, and was choosing not to make it a fact I would have to manage, because he had learned that I managed facts poorly when they arrived before I was ready for them, was the most humbling of all, and I did not dismiss it. Elivar noticed at some point in the second hour, I saw her watching. She came to stand near me under the pretext of reviewing the formal refreshment arrangement, and she said nothing, and I said nothing, and we both watched the Veth'naar delegate nearest to us give Davin Thresh a quarter step of deliberate distance as he passed behind it. And then Elevar went back to her position, and I believe that was the first moment in 2 years that her assessment of the situation had changed, and I had been in the room all that time, and I was only now allowing my own to move. Yeneth came to me in the second hour as well. He said, "I don't have a category for what the Veth'naar are doing." I said, "I know." He said, "Do you know what it is?" I said, "I'm beginning to." He looked at me in a way he had not looked at me before, not the look of a senior officer deferring to her commander, but the look of someone recalibrating, and went back to his position. Ren Vashori simply watched, from her station in the corner of the hall, and I saw her write something in the peripheral log, and I knew she was ahead of all of us on the interpretation because she always was. The summit concluded at the 7th hour. The Veth'naar delegation departed through the eastern entrance, back through their side. As the senior delegate passed through the door, it paused, not turning back fully, just a partial orientation, the check of a direction, and looked toward the center of the hall, where Davin was standing at the registry station, tallying the session documentation with his usual systematic attention. The senior delegate held that orientation for 2 seconds. Then it left. I dismissed my honor guard. I dismissed Elevar and Yeneth. I told Ren Vashori I would complete the session documentation myself and she could close her log. She gathered her materials, and then she paused at the door and said, without turning, the variant files he brought from his patrol service records, the annotated section on Veth'naar encounter protocols. The word they use, the one that translates to acknowledging a corridor. It means they identified something they consider impractical to move through. They logged it, they made the acknowledgement, and they chose a different path. A pause. He has been in this corridor for 12 years. This is not the first time they have made that acknowledgement. She left. I stood in the empty hall for a while. The banners hung in the still air. The light through the clerestory panels had gone to the amber of late afternoon, and the hall that had been full of 11 delegations and controlled pressure and the weight of assessments being made was now just a room, quiet and cleared, and I sat with what I did not know, and I let it sit with me. His patrol service records, 12 years of them. 11 corridor overlap points. I found him in the station document room at the 9th hour late, but the station was quiet and the document room lamp was on, and it was the place where work happened when the day's official shape had dissolved into the work that remained. He was logging the summit documentation, working through a checklist in the same methodical way he worked through everything, and when I came in he looked up and said, 3 clauses in the Veth'naar corridor terms need secondary review. They reference prior compact instruments that predate the current registry format. I've flagged them. And then, after a pause, there's also an anomaly in the Veth'naar delegation's formal response to the secondary compact offer. They accepted the language of the instrument but amended one subclause, and the amendment references a territorial acknowledgement that isn't in the current compact record. I think we need to look at it before the document is filed. I said, I need to read your patrol service records. He set down his stylus, he looked at me, he said all of them. I said, the 11 corridor overlap points. He reached into the document case beside the table. It was already there, already organized, the specific file already tabbed. He set it on the table between us, not handed to me, but set between us in the space that is neither his nor mine, and I noticed that and did not know why it mattered and filed it away to understand later. I opened the file. I read for 2 hours. The 11 corridor overlap points were patrol records, and they read like patrol records. Sequence of events, positions held, outcome, personnel status, notes. The language was the flat cadence of frontier documentation, stripped of drama and narrative, which is one of the ways frontier documentation lies, not by falsifying the content, but by compressing it into a shape that does not convey the texture of what it describes. What the records described in that flat cadence was this. On 11 separate occasions over 12 years, Davin Thresh's patrol unit had been present in sectors where Veth'naar scouting parties were conducting assessments. On 11 occasions, the assessments had concluded without incident. On 11 occasions, the settlements in the sector had not been touched. On 11 occasions, the patrol reports filed afterward noted patrol unit position, Veth'naar scouting party activity, timeline, and the outcome was always the same. The Veth'naar withdrew. The patrol unit continued its rotation. No engagement, no confrontation. No engagement, no confrontation, 11 times. The Veth'naar do not withdraw, not from anything they have decided to move through. That is the foundational fact of every Veth'naar border assessment document in the compact archive. The Veth'naar identify, they log, they move, or they acknowledge what they will not move through and they leave it. They do not negotiate. They do not yield to force because force deployed at a scale that matters to them is deployed at a scale that does not survive the deployment. They assess, and the assessment is final, and the final assessment on 11 separate occasions involving a human frontier patrol commander of no particular rank or record recognition was, not this, acknowledged corridor, chose a different path. 3 of the reports had margin notations in a script I recognized eventually as old Veth'naar territorial marking, not standard compact script, but the older form that scouting parties use for field assessments. The notation translated roughly as "this one is of the corridor," which in Veth'naar assessment language is a geographic designation. It means the thing has been classified as part of the terrain that the corridor contains. Not a person, from the Veth'naar perspective. Part of the ground. Something the ground includes that the Veth'naar have logged as a feature of the passage. 3 notations. 3 separate occasions on which a Veth'naar scouting party had looked at Davin Thresh and written something in their territorial marking system that said, in the language they use for places and passages and features of the geography they navigate. This one. I sat with the file open in front of me for a long time. Then I took out a compact registry terminal, and I opened the Vel'Karath formal declaration protocols, which are in the compact instrument library under Cultural Appendix 7, which I had read once at my bonding certification and had not opened since. The formal declaration protocols include 3 instruments. The bonding declaration I had signed 2 years ago. The maintenance declaration I had filed annually since. And the Orvsal asterisk, which translates imperfectly. The closest rendering in compact standard is, "I was wrong, and the recognition is mine to give." It is a formal record of revised assessment. It is filed into the compact log and cannot be retracted. It carries specific legal weight regarding the compact partnership. And because Vel'Karath law is what it is, it carries social weight that anyone with access to the public log will be able to read. I was aware that Elavar and Yeneth and Ren Vashari and the 3 junior liaisons, and everyone else who had participated in or witnessed or failed to correct the 2 years of court consensus, would be able to read it. I completed the declaration instrument. I initialed each section. The required phrasing in the recognition field was, I, name and rank, having reviewed evidence not previously considered, make formal revision of prior assessment of compact partner's name and affiliation, and record the following recognition, the recognition to be named. I sat with the recognition field blank for a while. Then I wrote, I record that Davin Thresh, human, retired Frontier Patrol Commander, compact partner under Corridor Instrument 7, is not what I described him to be. I record that I described him as harmless, which is an error. I record that I described him as decorative, which is a further error and one that reflects more on the assessor than on the assessed. I record that I treated him as present and technically necessary, and contributing nothing of tactical significance, which is an error that I am embarrassed to have held for the length of time I held it. I record that, what he has contributed to the safety of this corridor and this posting over 12 years of Frontier Patrol service, and over 2 years of service to this station that I did not properly observe or acknowledge, is not a small thing. It is not a decorative thing. The Veth'naar, who do not make acknowledgments for convenience, have made an acknowledgment 11 separate times and again today, and I believe them. I have believed accurate information for my entire career, and I intend to continue. My compact partner is mine in the full meaning of that word, which I have not until this filing treated as a full meaning. I intend to treat it as one from this day forward, and I intend to do the work that such a revision requires. I am grateful for the evidence, and I am embarrassed it took this long to read it. I filed it into the compact log. The timestamp read the 23rd hour. I closed the terminal. The document room was quiet and lit by the single lamp above the table, and Davin Thresh was still at the document station, reviewing the flagged summit clauses, and I became aware that he had been in this room for the 2 hours I had been reading the patrol files and the additional time I had spent completing the declaration, and he had not said a word and he had not left. I said, "You knew." He said, "Knew what?" I said that they would do that today, in the hall. He set down his stylus. He said, "I didn't know. I thought it was probable. The reassessment passes through the eastern sub-corridor suggested they'd relogged the sector. If they sent a scouting party to the summit, which the renegotiation terms made likely, they would assess the room. And the room would have whatever it had the last time they assessed the corridor." He paused. "I didn't tell you because telling you would have created an expectation. And if the expectation didn't materialize, you'd have been looking for something that wasn't there. And if it did materialize, I thought you should see it clearly." I said, "Rather than through a prediction you'd made." He said, "Yes." I said, "That is a very careful way to manage information." He said, "I've been told that before." I said, "By whom?" He looked at me for a moment, and something moved across his face that might have been the beginning of something. He said, "Various people, over the years." I said, "I filed the *Orvsil*. The stillness that followed was the stillness of a weight shifting. He knew what that was. I could see that he knew, which meant he had read the Vel'Karath formal declaration protocols, which he had apparently done at some point in 2 years without mentioning it, which was entirely consistent with how he had operated every day of those 2 years. He said, "You didn't have to do that." I said, "I did. The protocols are specific about when the instrument is appropriate. I met every criterion." He said, "It carries public weight." I said, "I know." He looked at me for a moment longer. Then he said, "All right." Just those 2 words in the tone of a man who has been patient for a long time and has heard, at the end of the patience, the thing that tells him the patience has not been wasted, not triumphant, not even particularly warm in that first moment, just all right, the way a long-held breath releases. I said, "I want to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." He said, "I've been answering honestly for 2 years." I said, "I know. That's why I'm asking now rather than before." I looked at the patrol file still open on the table between us. "When you arrived, when you said you try not to be in the way, what had you arranged to be not in the way of before?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Assignments where the people around me decided what I was before they read the record. It's not a criticism, it happens. People are busy. They have their own competencies and their own ways of reading a room, and a human in a compact posting doesn't read the way the room expects. I've learned it goes better if I don't interrupt the process." I said, "Because the record eventually speaks." He said, "Sometimes." I said, "Not always." He said, "No, not always." A pause. I thought this one probably would. I said, "Why?" He said, "Because you run a good posting. Because the people around you are competent and honest even when they're wrong. Because Ren Vashori flagged the patrol log read history in the first week, and I knew someone in this station was paying attention. Another pause. And because the corridor itself has specific characteristics that would surface eventually. I've been waiting for the Veth'naar to come back through, in a context where it would be visible. I said, "You have been patient." He said, "I've had time to practice." I said, "The Orvsel asterisk is in the public log. My court will read it in the morning." He said, "I know." I said, "They will understand that I am revising a 2-year assessment, and that the error in the original assessment was mine." He said, "That's what the instrument says." I said, "I want you to know that I do not intend to make you responsible for carrying the error. It was my error. I am the one who marked the summary read without reading it. I am the one who did not correct the court when it called you soft, which you are not. I am the one who did not ask what in the way meant when you said you try not to be in it." I looked at him. "I'm sorry." He looked at me. And this is the moment I keep returning to in the 43 days since, not the Veth'naar stepping back, not the compact log, not the patrol records with their margin notations in a language older than the compact itself. This moment, in the document room, with the single lamp above the table and the station quiet all around us, when I said I was sorry and Davin Thresh's face did something I had not seen it do in 2 years of watching it do almost nothing. It opened, just slightly, the way a door opens when the latch has been held in place by something careful and patient, and the thing holding it has decided, on the basis of evidence, to release. Not dramatically, not all at once, just the beginning of the opening, the first movement of something that had been very still. He said, "It's all right." I said, "It's not, but I intend to make it closer to all right." He looked at me for another moment. Then he reached across the table and picked up the summit documentation file and said, "The 3 clauses with the prior instrument references. Do you want to work through them tonight, or should I draft a summary for the morning session?" The tone was not as though nothing had happened, as though what had happened was now part of what was, and work was also part of what was, and both things could be true at the same time. As though the natural order of things was for us to be working through problems together at the 23rd hour in the document room. I said, "Tonight." I pulled a chair around to his side of the table. We worked through the clauses. It took another hour and a half. He was patient and precise, and occasionally, when a clause was particularly convoluted in its cross-referencing, quietly funny in a way I had not permitted myself to notice before. He knew the compact instrument history in a way I did not, because he had apparently read most of it at some point, and when a prior instrument was relevant he could describe it from memory with the specificity of someone who reads things and then keeps them. At one point I caught myself looking at him across the lamplight instead of at the document, and he caught me looking, and he did not look away, and neither did I, and then we both went back to the clauses. We filed the completed summit documentation at the 25th hour. He closed the file. I closed the terminal. The station had gone fully quiet around us, the kind of quiet that comes when a place has done its work for the day and is resting. I said, "I would like it if tomorrow were different from the way yesterday was." He looked at me with those gray eyes, the same level unhurried gaze that I had misread for 2 years as equanimity, and that I now understood was something more specific than equanimity. It was the gaze of someone who does not look away from things, including things that are difficult, including things that require waiting to be understood. And then the line of his mouth changed. Not a smile, exactly, or not only a smile. The expression of a man who has been waiting at a specific threshold and has heard, on the other side of it, the exact sound he was waiting for. He said, "Tomorrow can be whatever we make it." I have spent 43 days learning what that means. I expect I will spend considerably longer. The patrol records are extensive, and the document room is quiet at the late hours, and there is always something that needs to be worked through. I have discovered that I am better at the working through when I am on the same side of the table, and I have discovered that the same side of the table has always been available, and the only thing that was not available was my willingness to pull the chair around. That is what I know. That is how I knew. The Veth'naar told me. The record confirmed it. I filed the asterisk Orvsil before dawn and the waiting was done, and tomorrow has already been something different. I intend to keep it that way. I have the record now. I intend to read it.